All right, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to our second edition of Tending Lilith's Fire. This is Kohenet Matan. I'm Kohenet Grenn, and we're excited to be here to talk about the ways in which we tend Lilith's fire and other topics that are related and up for us today. So we were just now talking before going on camera about embodiment, about divination, about ritual, and always threaded through all of it is Source and Lilith. So Annie, do you want to go into some of what you were describing?
Oh, I'm going first. So it just came to me also that I want to say, like, we are engaging in this sharing and this practice in the name of Lilith. And it's nice to just invoke her when we start off. So we were talking about how do we tend Lilith's fire, and a few things occurred to me. I was like, well, that feels like a big question. How have we tended Lilith's fire in the last 24 hours? And just honing in, I thought, okay, one of the ways that I feel like I tend to Lilith's fire is to be attentive to my no's and my yeses. And so that definitely shows up in the topic of body and embodiment, in the category of body and embodiment. And how we use our energy is very much in tune with our yeses and our no's, and the reclamation of our sovereignty over our bodies and our energy and our time feels very much Lilith work.
I love that you are combining body with energy and time, because I'm not always very embodied. I go into my head. That's my preferred place. That's my default. And my Bria, that world, that mental thinking, intellectual world over the physical. But the energetic and the question of time and how I protect my time are very up for me these days, and I think are very important. And one thing you mentioned, this whole topic actually of coming into your no's and your ability to say no over yes, I wanted to say over the recording, is especially important for women. Not only because women tend to apologize for things that aren't their fault very frequently, but often to say yes too often in order to take care of others.
Yeah, and I appreciate very much that you're highlighting the permission to say no. And I feel grateful that that's been coming more and more into the mainstream, that the reality of our sovereignty over our bodies, boundaries. I mean, we're not there yet, but we're talking about it. And I want to bring forward our permission to say yes to what we want, and to be allowed to want what we want, to hold space for our desires, to be wanty without limit, to be able to dream big and say yes to what feels good unapologetically, to ask for what we want and say yes to what we want unapologetically. And I think there's a way in which I've seen these show up. Another way of saying how these have shown up sometimes is like in our vulnerability and in our power. And sometimes I feel like the conversation around no's shows up more in vulnerability, and the conversation around yeses shows up more in the realm of power, and that women's vulnerability is more accepted now, and women's power is still an edge. So, I want to like bring the balance.
Yes, and I think that's a stronger discussion and a stronger position, the no position, for that very reason. Yeah, not just I want to say not just allowed to say no, but encouraged. So that from a young age we would be encouraged to set boundaries and limits, regardless of what somebody else wants. That is convenient for them or that is serving only them without reciprocity. I think that's really key. And I think that's something a lot of us examine almost daily in our relationships, in our domestic relationships, for example.
Yes, right? Yes, yes, like the balance of labor, right, ties into this very much, and especially how we're socialized as kids, especially women, especially racialized folks, and especially racialized women, that like we are here to serve everyone else. Our needs are not even secondary. Like sometimes our needs aren't even on the table. One of the things that I have talked about as being, for me, the work of adulthood is discerning, articulating, and advocating for my needs, because I wasn't allowed to have needs as a kid. And so now I have to learn that I'm not only allowed, encouraged. I really appreciate that. I'm encouraged to tune into what I need, name it, ask for it, and advocate for it as if it is unconditionally a given that I should have it.
Exactly.
And
I think part of what goes with that is being encouraged and not only allowed to have voice. When I expressed my own opinion as a kid, I was considered fresh or impertinent, these old fashioned words. But definitely disobedient much of the time, simply for having an opposing viewpoint about what I should do, what course of action to take on something. And that carried into my teen years, which I find absurd looking at it kind of from the outside. If I had a daughter today, I think I probably would also not allow for some of her opinions when it came maybe to the area of dress. And I look at that today and I think, boy, it's a good thing I didn't have a daughter, or girl, it's a good thing I didn't have a daughter, because I would have been stricter than my rather authoritarian father. So I think that goes hand in hand, that ability to say no, that knowing you have the right to do that, like any other human, male or female, or non-binary, that we have the right to do that, as you say, without question, and that our voice even be encouraged. I make fun of my sister and her husband sometimes, because when their kids were 2, they made them, let them make their own decisions. Instead of saying no, which many parents are doing constantly when a kid is age 2, they were asking the kids, kind of what they wanted, so they could make their own decision about a course of action. And I was aghast. I just thought it was bizarre that they weren't laying down the law. And now that I'm older, I really see that very differently. And I see how those 2 kids have grown up and how self-sufficient they are. And in fact, the girl has become the most outspoken, successful young woman. It's a real, testament to what can happen if you change that one piece of child rearing.
Yeah, and if you imagine if we were allowed to trust what we knew was right for us. And I recently was chatting with a mom I know. We were in a playground in the summer when things were open, and her child was running around, I think either in socks or barefoot. And this playground has a rubberized ground, like it's not gravel. And I was like, wow, I wasn't thinking you let your kid so much as, why is your kid choosing to do this? And, do you talk to them about it? And our kids are the same age. They're both 5. They're in the same class, actually. And she said, well, I ask them when they want to make a choice about something that like feels iffy to me. I ask them, like, what does your body tell you? What does your soul tell you? And I tried it with my kid that day in the park, and she was on the top of the big, big climber, and she was looking down at this like pretty challenging chain thing. And my kid's gross motor is not great. And she was like, I'm coming down this way. And I looked up at her because I could not reach her to support her coming down. And I said, well, ask your body. What does your body say about that? Ask your soul. Does your soul say this is a good idea? And she paused and she looked at me and she said, I'm going down the slide. And it was really cool. Like when we give ourselves, even like when we come to the edge of a hard thing and think, should I push myself to do this hard thing? Like when we ask ourselves, our inner child, our soul, our higher or inner knowing, what feels right, we always know. And I love the example you gave, because like from 2, their parents were giving them some sovereignty and the ability to check in with what they already knew. And studies have shown that little kids know way more than we give them credit for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm interested in your description of it in terms of checking in with the body or the soul. I would have said one's intuition, and those may all be the same, or in a certain way, they may all manifest in the same way. It's because it is in your body in a way, you know, when the hair in the back of your neck stands up because you know you're going into a dangerous situation, for example, that's in the body. Yeah.
And I think the reason I use that language with my daughter is because I don't think she would understand check in with your intuition. I mean, I would like her to eventually, so I probably should start using that language because she'll ask me, what does that mean? And then I can give her examples. But I think she knows what it means to ask her body. I've taught her to ask her body if she's hungry and to ask her body if she needs to use the bathroom. The challenge is she's like me, and if she's immersed in a task, she will ignore her body. She would rather, and also she's a kid, so like she would rather ignore her body and do the fun thing. So then, you know, I have to like take away the distractions and give us a chance to take a breath, get really present. Like, let's not be watching a show right now. Let's not be in the middle of a game right now, and just like get quiet and ask again. And usually she knows.
Yeah, that's great. No, of course, she would be too young to know what intuition is, but it's wonderful that you're having her do that check-in, because as she gets older, she'll make that transition, you know, very easily. And maybe you don't even need to, you know, maybe your body is enough.
Yeah. And I think also various of us have different words that work for like where we find our discernment, whether it's in our body. It's not, I will say, public service announcement, it's not in your head. No matter what you've been told about how to make decisions, we can analyze and process data with our heads, our minds, but our minds are not for decision making. Our authority, and now I'm learning a little about human design, so I encourage you, go look that up, mybodygraph.com. You can get your chart done. But our authority, my authority is emotional. I don't remember what yours is, Devorah. I could check, but like our decision making happens in our intuitive spaces, not in our thinking space.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And I challenge you, feel free to prove me wrong. Anyone, like, put it in the comments, send an email if you really believe decisions need to happen in your mind. I think there might be a human design authority that has something to do with that, but like very, very, very rare. Yeah. Usually body, in the voice, in the spleen, which means like in that funny feeling from our, it's actually our immune system tapping us, that funny feeling, or in our feelings.
Right. Yeah, I would love to have comments on that and questions about how you make decisions. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Where is that place?
Yeah. And especially like, how do you make decisions when you feel most in alignment? And how do you know? What is that sense that you know, oh, that was the right choice? Like all the time, techniques to tune in. Like remember that your comments are seen by others, so you're helping, maybe helping when you share your techniques with us, you're sharing them with anyone else who's reading them too.
This is true. So do we want to look back over the last 24 hours, just in terms of, it's a little more brass tacks than what we're talking about, which I love, but I know we both have time constraints today. So I'm wondering whether—
Feel free. Why don't you start us off with that?
Okay, so I was thinking about it this morning, as I said to Annie, how do we tend Lilith's fire in a real everyday material world kind of way, and in non-material world. And so I love the question you posed of the last 24 hours. So I actually had to look at my calendar because every day is so full. I have to isolate the time space. And so it started beautifully with a divination and meditation session to determine a course of action with a group I'm working with. And I knew that we needed to go outside of our heads to look ahead and lay out our plans, which have been— it's been a wonderful process, and I knew we needed that other dimension. And so we did that. I put in an art piece, I put in a drumming piece, and it was a beautiful way to start the day. I had a mentorship client, and so that in that kind of scenario, or with a spiritual guidance client, I call on many parts of my persona, I guess, of Lilith's persona, of the independence, certainly of the free spirit and the free voice and the ability to find agency, as you're describing, to self-authorize and to examine where is that place that allows us to self-authorize, allows us to step into our power. Looking at my notes here to see if there's something else, and of course, they're all over the place. It also showed up in some of the cards I pulled from Journey of Love deck, which you introduced me to, Annie, which I love. And Seed of the Heart is what came out yesterday, which was very pertinent. And then pulling a card for our conversation today, I got Shakti, which is no great surprise because we energize each other, I think, in these conversations. And Shakti, well, I've been looking at pictures of fire all morning as well, and women around fires, and two people sitting around a fire on the beach talking, all tied to the Lilith's Fire Circle program that we're about to start on. And so with my institute. And so that connection, the activities yesterday, also several things reconnected me with two different friends and gave me an opportunity to be of service to them, or at least to offer support to some difficult things they're going through. And actually, in one of those cases, Lilith found her way in because there's a wonderful book. It's actually for girls and teens called My Name is Lilith from Girl God Books. And a very simple, sweet introduction. But I think what we're going to be doing in this program of mine, and what I offered to do for a friend, is to read that story out loud. Even though it's technically not for adults, it's also very much for adults. And not bad to pretend, that we're hearing a story at bedtime. And the author's actually, it was her idea to come in and read it, as she's done for some other groups of adults, to read it like story time. And I love that idea. So that's another way, just bringing forward, as I did in a class that I taught, an introductory class on Lilith on Wednesday, bringing in the most basic introduction to who she was, and as an archetype, as a myth, and as a very real figure. If we look at how women are still demonized today for often having the same standards or the same behaviors as men, that it didn't start with her. It hasn't ended with her, but this demonization of women is something that is always fueling my fire, and so keeps hers alive. That examination. Yeah.
That's lots, so much. It's amazing. I love that we have all of these examples, and there was so much I wanted to respond to. One thing was when you were saying, like, even though it seems kind of funny to like read stories around the fire, that seems like a perfect way to tend Lilith's fire. And yesterday I was just watching on Netflix the cooking documentary by Michael Pollan, and it's broken down into the 4 elements. And the first episode, the first part of his book and the documentary is on fire. And they were talking about the importance of campfire stories. So, like stories around the fire. And so I feel like you bringing to your Lilith Fire Circle a story around the fire of the archetype who the whole practice and exploration is based on feels in perfect alignment. It was such a good reminder of, like, yeah, grown-ups have been doing this all along. Like, this is part of our transmission of tradition. And
exactly. I was just, yeah. And the oral transmission is women's, great strength, I think, and also a way that women continue to develop and share and pass down lineages when we weren't writing, when we maybe were not even literate. But those things have been very potent, those collections of prayers we have among European Jewish women from around, I think, 17th to 19th century, called techinas, these little blessings. They were written by men often, but I'm sure they were also written by women. Little blessings of your bread in the oven on a Friday night and things like that. And also when you would go to the mikveh or ritual bath, a certain blessing there. I can't imagine men were writing those. It just makes a lot more sense that women were. But when we first started seeing the scholarship on that, there wasn't an exact, yes, this was definitely written by women. And sometimes, of course, it's hard to know. But I think the women like Hava Weissler, who were doing that scholarship, couldn't really write that just as a fact, because they would have gotten so much flack from a publisher, let's say, or other, authorities in quotes. And now I think more of that conversation is able to happen, which is great. I know I'm going off topic a little bit, but
no, I took us there. And I would add, I feel like also connected to this program that you're starting, the Lilith Fire Circle. I think one of the other ways that this happens, even without the fire, is when we gather in circle. And that's another way that we engage as women, especially in tradition, in co-created ritual, in storytelling, in connecting in deep and meaningful ways. And whether that's in, I facilitate the Living from the Heart Circle and New Moon, and Red Tent actually has become is a movement, inspired by Anita Diamond's book, that also invites the gathering of women in sacred circle, whether around an altar or a fire or a living room or a dinner table, or a brunch table for that matter, right? Just a container for all of us to be together.
Yeah.
And just showing up authentically, which is also with our yeses and our nos and our kvetches and our celebrations, and that too feels in the tradition of Lilith's fire tending.
Yes, and oral transmission. And I just want to mention, since you mentioned Red Tent, a woman who's been working on red tents in every neighborhood worldwide. She's been working on this, and that's Deanna Lam, L''AM. And she talks about womb wisdom, and she does many wonderful programs for a number of years now. I think it must be at least 25 years. Involving directed at girls for to prepare them for menarche, but also working with girls and their mothers, and now recently also working with moms in menopause. And so always looking at blood rights from different directions and connecting women around the world through this practice. The red tent is a fantastic metaphor for so many things. Yeah.
Right.
And reality.
Is there anything else you want to bring about Lilith fire tending today?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot, and it's never enough. And I see the time, and I know we could easily, and I know we will continue this. I think we were talking about maybe doing this almost every week, just even if it's not the whole theme, but talking about how we are tending that fire today, and how women we know are also doing that.
That's certainly our hope. So thank you for tuning in. If I may say so, if you have enjoyed this, please like the video and share it with anyone you think would be interested, and subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next ones show up. And if you have any questions, we'd really love to hear from you. Any questions, comments? How do you tend Lilith's fire? How do you discern? We talked about, how do you know when your decisions are in alignment? Anything you want to share about your yeses and nos. Your voice is welcome here. Part of tending Lilith's fire is opening up to our wisdom and sharing it out loud. We'd love to hear.
Yes, and using your voice, as they say, even if it shakes. This is not a place where your voice needs to tremble. We welcome all your comments. All right.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Next time.